Just to introduce our panel guests, again we have Glen Brennan from the National Australia Bank. We have Paulson from Reconciliation Australia. A lady who needs no introduction, Aunty Huggins. Hagan, editor of the National Indigenous Times. And one of the best known comedians in Australia, Mr. Choolburra. Thank you, Jeff.
Good afternoon, everyone. When we heard that welcome to country this morning, hearing a strong, smart Aboriginal man in language singing up the country, I felt good in my heart. And I actually drank on the strength that Shannon shared with us. We were tapping back into the longer story, the deeper story of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledge. And so in the hour that we've got now, we want to take that feeling. Some of this is very personal. It's to have 5 wonderful Aboriginal people share with you where that strong feeling comes from in their heart and mind, to share it and lift the roof off this old hotel and start thinking about how we spread that blue sky feeling, that power that was there from Shannon at the start of the day. So to kick off in yarning style, in Aboriginal style, I'm going to ask each one of our storytellers to give you a little of their story about where Stronger, Smarter came up in their heart. Aunty Jack.
Thank you. Before I start, I wish to acknowledge the Turrbal people and the Yuggera people from this land, to thank them for having us all here. And to my elders, especially my mob from Cherbourg, who are sitting there, great to see you. Aunty Ada, Aunty Grace, Uncle John, lovely to see you all. And to everybody else, everybody here who I guess come with open hearts and are very committed to the ideology of strong and smart. Just a very quick essence about my background, because I think it's really important why I'm here as well. I actually, and Grant will tell you about his mum too. Our 2 mums went to Cherbourg State School. Well, his probably did, but my mother went to the Baramba State School. And this year, we're celebrating 70 years of the name change from Baramba to Cherbourg at the Golden Oldies in about 2 weeks, and I'll be there, so I booked my seat. So I'm very proud to say this has a very personal reflection for me. My mother and her 15 siblings went to Baramba, now known as Cherbourg State School. In the days, we know the history, people. I'm not going to tell you about it. We know that history of being allowed to go to grade 4, then out to domestic service, and then out to stock work for the men, etc., etc., and being slaves for white people. You know, being strong and smart, I've always said that I will never be a slave to a white person. And these days, I have a white woman who cleans my house. I did have a white bloke. Thank you. We're going to raise the roof, aren't we? Yeah, well, I'll tell you a few home facts. I did have a white bloke, and I thought that was pretty good, but he was the best cleaner too, you know. But now I've got a white woman, and she's lovely. I pay her, so times have changed, haven't they? Also, I want to say to our elders in the room, without you, we could not be who we are and where we come from. I'm very proud to say that my affiliation with Cherbourg is deep and wide. I have my grandparents who are buried there, and a lot of my aunties and uncles of blood, the first uncles and aunties, and I guess it was through them and their teachings and their learning about Cherbourg and what that was about and the history of that, that I became the person that I became. The strong and smart philosophy that's taught and that's embraced by all of us should be, I believe, universal. Because I tell you what, when I was going to school in the 60s, I knew the teachers who were good to me and the teachers who were very brutal to me. When I was in year 10, I was told that I wasn't able to do high school, I wasn't able to do senior, because I was Aboriginal, and Aboriginal people have got no brains. And it's true, Aunty Ada, we're all taught to be dumb blackfellas in those days. I hope the times have changed now. It can't go on. But every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person in this room has a story. We are the stories of our people. We know the stories, we know the hurt, and we know that pain. So, growing up as a young girl in Inala, I would never have believed where I would be today in terms of the leadership roles that I've had and being able to, travel internationally and nationally and do all the great stuff. Up until 18 months ago, I was at the University of Queensland for 14 years. I escaped, and now I work for myself. And I have a sense of freedom and a joy about that. But I can tell you, when teachers told me at school that you were strong and you were smart, and they affirmed my Aboriginality, about who I was, where I came from, and being Aboriginal is really good, I believed those teachers. I didn't believe all the ones that said I couldn't do it, you're too dumb, by the virtue of your race, you'll never succeed. And look where we all are. I'm very proud of all the young fellas on this panel. Well, they're a lot younger than me. So that's me, a very snapshot of who I am and where I've been. I'd like to go on, but I've got to share this. I'm only woman here too, I can see, but I can hold up to that. Thank you.
I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose land we meet today, the Turrbal and the Yagara peoples. Also like to acknowledge the elders here, past and present, distinguished elders in the front row there, with my lovely wife Rhonda, of course, and also other panellists on the stage here sharing their wisdom to the rest of you today. Now, I just want to identify a couple of pivotal points in my life that shaped me to be the man I am today. And oops, on cue, they've got my promotion going on behind me. Well, that's wonderful. You can look at the promotion behind me. I think you'll see Chris Zara. He's on the front page of our National Indigenous Times, so if Chris hasn't seen it, he can glance up there from time to time. Now, I'm like many Aboriginal people in Queensland. I'm displaced. My traditional owners were displaced from Thargomindah, or the area around Thargomindah. I'm from the Cullity tribe in southwest Queensland. They had to make way for partial expansion. I think that's a pretty common trait around Australia. And we were moved to the outskirts of a town in southwest Queensland called Cunnamulla. And of course, if you look at the economics of any township, you look at the least saleable parcels of land in any community, and there beside the sewage treatment works or the rubbish tip. We were, and the French camp I lived on and I was raised on was adjacent to the sewage treatment works. And to make it even worse, we were separated by the township, the White Township, by a cemetery. And you all know Murray's are very suspicious people, and it was very scary walking home from the movies on the weekend past the cemetery. But there were some pivotal moments in my life, and the one was when my father told me a story about how he joined the Labor Party from a French camp. He went into town and they had meetings in town, and he was the only Aboriginal who went to the Labor Party meeting. And he walked into town and he went to the house of the chairperson of the Labor Party. And one day he came home and he told my mum, he said, look, everyone's going home from the meeting and they're going home to their homes, to, a 3 or 4 bedroom home. And he said, I've got to walk back over the Sandhill to the French camp. And we lived in galvanised tin sheeting for walls and roofs, and we had to put chewing gum or paper in the holes when it rained because they were used galvanised sheets of tin with nail marks everywhere. So Dad then said, well, this isn't good enough for Aboriginal people just to be accepting fringe living as a normal way of life, normality. So he got a loan from his pastoralist friend who was making a lot of money for. He was working in the pastoral industry. He got an endorsement from the president of the Labor Party and also the mayor, who was also in the Labor Party, to get a loan from the Commonwealth Bank. And Dad became the first Aboriginal in Cunnamulla to design and buy his own house in Cunnamulla. We were the first family to move into a home in Cunnamulla, and Dad set that scene very early that you don't have to accept what people want you to be, and it is of an inferior kind to those in town. Of course, before Dad, my grandfather, Albert Hagan, he also lived in the French camp of Cunnamulla, and he wouldn't accept the fact that we had to walk into town to go and buy our groceries. He set up a non-perishable grocery store on the French camp called the Yumba. And the Chamber of Commerce thought that he wouldn't last very long and would go broke. They didn't think the Aboriginal people had the acumen or the business know-how to make a business work. And he actually almost broke a lot of the people in the chamber in the stores in town because he did a very thriving non-perishable goods on the Yumba. And it's quite strange if you think about it, because the bitumen road stopped at the cemetery. Good white folk would go into the cemetery off the bitumen road, and then thereafter was dirt road. So the retailers who came, or the salesmen who came out to sell grandfather the rice and tinned meat, they had to go on the corrugated road, and there was no lighting. So as you can see, from my grandfather and my father, they didn't accept the impoverished life, the inferiority that a lot of people wanted them to believe, and I got that. They instilled in me that very strong fighting spirit about being proud and being strong. And two other important events happened in my life. One was, of course, I went through boarding school, and I went off and got a degree and went down to Canberra, worked with Charlie Perkins, and I spent the first 20 years of my life with a very high disposable income, doing what public servants do, drinking and gambling in Canberra, most of the people I knocked around with. Then I met my lovely wife Rhonda in Innisfail, and I stopped gambling and I stopped drinking about, about 10 or 15 years ago. So it took us 10 years to get me off the grog and the gambling. And I've done huge things since then. I've finished my master's degree, I'm doing my PhD, I've published 4 books. The last one was published by University of Oxford Press. We've done award-winning documentaries together, and now I'm editor of a national newspaper. So Rhonda was very, very significant in changing my lifestyle. And the last thing I've done is, which is pivotal in my life, is becoming editor of the National Indigenous Times. And with the National Indigenous Times, I really wanted to run by the mantra of providing a voice for the voiceless. And I think my role as editor, I'm achieving that very goal of providing a voice for the voiceless. Thank you.
By way of introduction to Sean's story, as I listened this morning to Russell and others talk about the difficulty of building the relationships that we need here, the engagement between the school and the community, the family role in this, I thought, Sean, of my family walking out of the movies earlier this year after we'd seen The Sapphires. And I felt that power of the arts, of seeing a film that is directed by Wayne Blair, brilliant actor and creative force, shot by Warwick Thornton, absolutely outstanding cinema photographer, and the sisters in the movie, along with a visiting Irishman, of course, but it had so much reach into the hearts of Middle Australia to actually make people see the warmth of family, and to see how, for all of the honesty and rawness and sometimes anger and hurt, it was the joy of family and community and the love of land and of the country that that family was on. And it's because someone like you, brother, you make us laugh. And this is what's missing from a lot of the discourse, isn't it? You know, that joyful part of what it is to be Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander in those family situations. And you do it, and it's a huge part of the stronger, smarter busting out of the theory and spreading it across the country. Tell us where that came from for you. I mean, how did you end up getting up in front of the country and then the world to make us laugh?
All right. Yeah, it's funny. I saw The Sapphires and Emerald, and I thought that was gold. No. Anyway, the theatre was celebrating its 60th anniversary. I think it was a Diamond Jubilee or something. Anyway, all right. Anyway, anyway, my name is Sean, and thank you, Jeff. Me and Jeff were good mates, and I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm from Townsville, born and bred in Townsville, North Queensland, of course. And you know, at 10 years old, I wanted to do stand-up comedy. Well, I had a friend named Midgie Ross, and Midgie Ross told me at 10 years old I should do comedy. And he sort of planted that little seed in the back of my head that flourished into a little afro. And I always thought about doing comedy. And when I moved down to Sydney, I was on a modelling contract, I know, and yeah, I was staying at Leichhardt, you know, and down the road from me, there was the Comedy Store, and I thought, hey man, you know, and every day I'd walk past the Sydney Comedy Store. I thought one day I'm going to go in there, and I think 15 years later, I actually walked in there, and they had moved, and no one told me this, and so I went down to a Comedy Store in Sydney, and they were running at Moore Park at Fox Studios, and I decided to go on a Tuesday night. They had open mic nights, and I watched all these comedians, and I thought, and I'd already been dancing and all that kind of stuff, and you know, done a bit of modelling when I was 14, and I was doing this catwalk, and I tried to do something that no model has ever done. I tried to do like a spin because I was a good dancer, you know, and I tried to spin, and Murray went off the side of the stage, and I fell on the ground, and I realised that day on I was going to be a role model. But anyway, where was I? Back at this hotel. Anyway, and I saw these comedians doing 5 minutes each, and I thought, man, that's easy. I could do that because I was already used to the stage at this stage, and I you know, I put my name down, and you know, I went down the following Tuesday night, and they said to me, you know, this guy who was, I went down the following Tuesday night, and he was putting people's names up, like appearing, you know, those sort of things, you know. Yeah, Will Anderson or something like that, and he was on this huge ladder, and he said, hey, Sean, you should go on this Triple J Raw comedy competition. And I actually said to him, I said, one day you're going to be putting my name up. And he said, you wish, and I started shaking that ladder, and I said, all right, yeah, and you wish you're blackfish. Anyway, yeah. So I did that comedy routine, and I went into a Triple J comedy competition, and here I was performing against comedians who were around 18 and 19, and at that time I was a ripe old 33 years old, and but thanks to all of you, then I look around the age, anyway, hey, and yeah, I've never looked back unless my crazy ex looking for me, anyway, so I ended up starting up stand-up comedy, and since then I pretty much go to a lot of conferences each week. I'm at a different conference, you know, all around Australia. I have travelled over to Hong Kong, you know, done comedy in Hong Kong as well. And I told them that we have a affiliation with the Hong Kong culture too, and they said, well, how? And I said, yeah, anyway, I said, well, how? And I said, well, back home we say deadly. And they said, where did you get that word from? And I said, well, it started at my house. Back in 1973, we were playing around, we were listening and we heard on the wireless, because that's what they called the radio back then, the wireless. We heard that martial arts legend Bruce Lee had passed away, and we couldn't stop crying. We were in mourning, and it was in the afternoon. And my old grandma came out, and she said, oh, Don, he deadly now. Deadly. And we thought, yes, deadly. And I know what some of you guys are thinking. I don't want any royalties or any. But anyway, so I got into the comedy, and I sort of took off with the stand-up comedy, and then I went to Scotland a couple of times to the Edinburgh Fringe Fest, and I had probably about 2 or 5 people in my audience. Down the road was Joan Rivers, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So I turned it into a bit of a business and a bit of a career for me, and as a result, me and a few guys from the Melbourne Comedy Fest, we decided to set up a thing called Deadly Funny. And it was just open for anyone that just wanted to tell jokes or just have a career in comedy. And since then, there's a lot of blackfellow comedians out there and doing the business as well now. So that's sort of my background. How I'm associated with Stronger Smarter. It goes right back when me and Chris, Chris first got his tax return. And you know how them car salespeople are, they're really good speakers and that, and they said, yeah, you got to buy this car, and Chris had 1,500, it was a lot of money back then, and he said, you got to buy this car, it's Eastern European car. That's what the salesman kept telling us. We wanted to just buy a car, you got to buy this car, Eastern European car, got to buy this car, yeah, no worries. And we end up buying this Eastern European car, and we're driving back, and we thought, let's come pick up Uncle John, we'll take him back Sherbrooke, we'll go, catch up with all the family back there. By the way, Uncle John is my mum's younger brother, anyway. And so we go pick up Uncle John. We go, quick, you got to come. We got this number one. It's deadly, proper deadly number one car. It's Eastern European car. And we're cruising back to Sherbrooke in this car, and Eastern European car. And we're thinking, man, this car proper deadly, this one. And it started shaking. And we pulled over, and he said, quick, you young fellas want to go and see what's wrong with this car. So we lift up the bonnet, and we say, hey, look out. This proper deadly number one car got no motor. You better go and tell Uncle there. No, I'm not going to tell him. You're going to crack me. So, Chris, you go tell him. So Chris, Uncle, this car, Eastern European car, proper deadly number one car. He said, yeah. He said, well, it got no motor. He said, well, can't be. Well, how? And, he said, look in the boot for some tools. So we lift up the boot, and we say, hey, look, I got a spare motor here. Yes, this is a true story. Yeah. Some of you saying ratchet. Well, I had a ratchet set, and we disconnected that, and we put it in the front, and bam, we took off. And I think that old Volkswagen lasted us for a while, and then eventually Chris, moved on, got better money and that, He's always looked to me as sort of like a older, sort of younger looking brother. But anyway, and I know a lot about cars and that, and then I took him down to the Magic Mile. Is that what it's called here in Brisbane, the Magic Mile? And we took him to, he wanted to get a Holden, because a lot of, our family always come up to us and say, how you Holden, and, so that's why we like Holden. And he said, I told him, this car here, it's a good car, it's Holden, it's stronger, it's a SS. Stand for stronger and smarter, and that's there. Thank you.
Now, for a banker, my brother here did a pretty good, funny routine this morning, didn't he? Because it was all true. But I want you to be serious for this part of the day. If you look with your banker's vision out into the heart of even our cities, Western Sydney, I know now, Aboriginal youth unemployment is devastating at a time when unemployment nationally is very low. So how do we connect the reach of the Stronger, Smarter vision to those kids, maybe in school or maybe just out of school, who actually look at the jobs market and think, there's still a gulf. It is still very oppressive. The doors aren't all open. What is corporate Australia going to do to change that huge, disproportionate unemployment affecting younger Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people?
It's a good question, and Sean, you got the easy one. But I'm just trying to think of the best way to answer it. But I'll just say it, right? Corporate Australia needs to pull its finger out, right? And I'm sure there's much more eloquent ways to say it. But the fact is I think for too long that we've had young kids not aspiring to, it's very similar to the Stronger Smarter, to complete school, right? Or to go to university. But, I look around at those great big logos that you see in the sky around this city, right? And our young black kids should want to work for those logos, not just work in the local Aboriginal community organisation or the public service. And Steve and I done 10 years in the Canberra Public Service and nearly froze to death too. So But, you know, we want kids to have an aspiration to work in the corporate sector. And the benefits for working in the corporate sector can be many. One is that, you know, let's face it, you know, I think the boss of the public service, the Secretary for Prime Minister and Cabinet last year, he got paid, I think he got paid $680,000. That was the top dollar in the federal public service. Big money, eh? Not really in the corporate sector. The fact is that, you know, I think some of the Mac Bank guys maybe pulled down 20-odd million, right? And there's no, you know, it's not unusual for any corporate CEO to be paid millions, right? And I don't mean to throw that around, but I think it's really important that we start to have, it's not just to look in the corporate sector, but to be really successful in the corporate sector. And why can't we have more black fellas who are millionaires, right? Millionaires not only because they run great companies and people lead them in charge. I know as a banker, you know, I can see white people when I'm sitting across from the table, right? And they're sort of going, I don't know about you. You're Aboriginal, aren't you? And you're about to take a truckload of my money. And I go, yeah, and I'll look after it just as good as any white bloke will, right? Trust me. You never trust people, so trust me, right? So, but I think back to your point, which is that at the end of the day, we do need the education system to help deliver people, because I think what we're seeing at the moment in corporate Australia is the fact that that corporate Australia, rightly or wrongly, believes that its demand for Indigenous employees is not being met by supply. So they believe that there is a supply issue. And so I think what we've got to start to look at is, you know, are there traineeships that could do that? But as I said before earlier, you know, there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of traineeships that are going to nowhere, and they're going there super fast, right? But don't worry, they get on another one that's going another traineeship, and it's going, I got a cousin, I said this morning, he's on his 6th traineeship. He said, I rang him before and he said, don't use my name, right? Which is all cool. But, you know, I think that we need to start to, and this is where I was going with this, is that it can't just be corporate Australia wanting to do things because it feels sorry for Indigenous Australia, right? There's got to be somewhere in the middle where we, you know, the flash term that they're throwing around at the moment is this idea of shared value, which is where it's good business sense and it's good for Indigenous Australia. And I think if we get there, then we'll hit the holy grail of having something that's reasonably sustainable, right? And sustainable is something, you know, I reckon sustainable is a word that's thrown around by greenies who don't want to use the word profitable, right? But at the end of the day, I think that we've got to make Indigenous employment and Indigenous Australia seen as a resource for corporate Australia, who can bring in valuable expertise of employees, can bring in other expertise, whether it's in business sense, and can help make a business a success, right? If we're able to get to that, I think we'll find that we'll have corporates approaching Indigenous Australia with a different lens, more like a stronger, smarter lens, I might say, as opposed to approaching Indigenous Australia, oh, we just need to do something for Indigenous Australia so we can tick a box, you know, as opposed to doing something meaningful that'll have a long-term outcome, not only for the company, but also for Indigenous Australia.
Just before we move on, how did you, in your family, raise your expectations, though? Why did you set yourself to get the education and to take advantage of whatever opportunity you could to break down all of those barriers, to open the doors?
So my old man's a builder. This is a true story. So, and my older brother's a builder, my younger brother's a builder, and my sister's a lawyer. So I genuinely meant it before when I said I'm the black sheep, the banker. But my old man, so my older brother was doing the apprenticeship, and my old man said my mixture of stupidity and laziness meant that I couldn't do an apprenticeship with him and that I should go to university. So I did. So I went to university, and I remember him going, and that can go too far sometimes, but I remember him giving it to a teacher once because I hadn't done very well in the exam because I hadn't studied, but not that I told him that. But and the teacher responded by actually really raising the bar for me. And he wrote on my exam, and these two things have stayed with me. So on one question he wrote, "Glenn, this is not even wrong," which I thought was pretty funny. And the other one is that the more you write, the more it shows me you don't know what you're talking about. Right? So I went and seen him afterward, and he said, well, your old man was in here, right? He said, he goes, I reckon you can finish first in this class, and I'm going to make sure that happens, but by raising the bar. So, and again, so look, I've been fortunate to have people that push me along. I was fortunate enough to then able to do an MBA at Melbourne Business School and do quite well in that. But there's this thing about, for me, is that there is this thing about testing myself and wanting to do things that other people haven't done. And I've got to say that when I grew up, I'll tell you now, blackfellas didn't work in the bank. And the underlying thing there is that blackfellas couldn't be trusted with money. And, you know, it's a stereotype that you can grow up and believe, right? I want to make sure NAB's got truckloads of blackfellas that work in there. But, you know, the great thing is that so does ANZ, so does CBA and all those other little good banks that we should buy. But we're not allowed to because of the 4 pillars policy, Barnes. We're the smallest, they'd probably buy us. But I think that that's really important, right, is to have, so my parents had high expectations, and then you've got some abilities that you're continually trying to check, right? So look, I've been very fortunate. I was a professional rugby league player in my early days, and I was useless. I played for the Canberra Raiders, and I made the highlights tape as the guy getting smashed all the time. You know, the bloke that's getting, that was me. But I've worked for the public service. I worked for Charles Perkins for a while, and Charlie certainly taught me a lot. And then I ended up in the banking sector. And that's the other thing is that I think back in the past, you know, my father's generation is that you're a builder and you're a builder for life. And I just don't think that's the same anymore. Kids, you know, I tell kids that come through, I go, just do, you know, work here. You can be whatever. I do believe young blackfellas can be whatever they want to be these days, right? It's all laid out for them. And it was interesting to hear, you know, Aunty Jackie talking before, is that I think our young people have got it all laid out for them now. It's just, can we make sure we can manufacture it so they can take advantage of the opportunity? One, with access, and the other thing, in genuine belief in their ability in themselves, and a genuine expectation from the education sector, as well as the families that surround them, right? And I suppose that's the thing with mine, is that I was very lucky. Look, both my parents are Aboriginal. I didn't mention my mum, but, you know, if it was a knife fight, I think I'd rather have dad than mum, to be honest with you. She was certainly an enforcer. No one drunk in our house. We were, you know, it could be the scariest place on earth could be to tell my old man that I didn't want to go to school. But, you know, we got to see a lot of the dysfunction that happened around our house. But the old man was pretty adamant about making sure that education was just simply uncompromised, right? You will do it. His thing was, you know, all you need to do, son, is go to school and have a good time and learn. That's all I want you to do. Right? Stay away from the women, stay away from the smokes, stay away from all the other stuff which all young boys do. But that was his only expectation. He said, and I will take care of the rest of it for you. And I think it's a good thing. So I've got 3 boys now. So they're just trouble. So I know I had hair like yours, Sean, before they had kids. So they're just trouble. So, you know, it's one of those things that I hope to pass on to my kids. I think is the most important bit out of it. And I hope I do a half as good a job.
Grant, in your work with Reconciliation Australia, you would probably have all of the tools to measure whether or not the doors have opened up. So if we are lifting expectations in education, are we lifting expectations in the corporate world, in the society as a whole, to open all of those doors that have been closed so long?
Thank you, Jeff. Good question. The short answer is I think so. At this initial stage, we've looking at the evidence that what we've developed with our Reconciliation Action Plan program and the impact measurement tool that's been launched through other things like the Reconciliation Barometer that's been launched as well, that says that there are social attitudes that are shifting in our nation at the moment. It's an interesting time, folks, and before I continue much further, I do want to acknowledge the custodians of the land, the Turrbal and the Jaguar. I want to acknowledge my uncle and aunties from Cherbourg. Went to school with my mum, for Uncle John, for Aunty Gracie, for Aunty Ada, and I'll not acknowledge my big sister here because she has shaped me. And all these people on the panel here have also shaped me in some shape or form, including you, Jeff. I just also want to acknowledge you. I was talking to my family yesterday about where I was going and who I was going to be sitting at the table with, and my baby girl was listening. She reckoned, hey, Dad's going to be sitting at the table in a meeting with Jeff McMullin. So she's going to go to school today telling all her colleagues, my dad is so important that the man who invented the McMuffin is meeting with Dad. So, I'm just, you can take that one, Shawnee, a true story. Yeah, Jeff McMullin, bless you. But things are changed. Look, they are changing for myself as the first generation off the mission. My cousins and I are the generation, like we call ourselves the first generation off the mission. No one went to Year 12 before us. No one went to uni. I was just sitting down here next to my big sister. I was thinking about my first orientation at university, and it was Aunty Beryl Wharton who was there. It was at orientation week, and she said, "Now, you young people," she said it just like that, "don't think you just got in here because you're smart. You got in here because education, as you're right, it was fought for. It wasn't handed out. We got locked up. We got bashed. We protested so you could get equal access to this system. You remember that when you're slacking off at the end of semester." And we was just all little fellas, we were like this. We was all skinny Murrays back then, and we was all wide-eyed looking at each other. Because it was 88 by that, it was 1988, it was a bicentennial, so it was a fiery time. And so it was University of Queensland, and that was, Aunty Beryl Wharton scared the ghoulies out of us. But we didn't realise the power of what she said till a little bit later. Is that it's important to not only succeed, but to remember that the price has been paid for you to realise the opportunities that can be had. And you guys are paying some of the prices now, all of you, and I just want to honour all of you as educators, because you are possibility makers. You are destiny changers. The prices that you pay in thinking how to be stronger and smarter in your institutions actually shape the next generation. And I want you to think about that self. It's not how we can make your students stronger and smarter, but how much stronger and smarter you will become, because the limitations are only of our kids are only set by your growth. I just want to encourage you to continue to think beyond and above the levels that you have set for yourself in your institutions, in your departments, and and wherever you come from. Be that because the limitations you set for yourselves will be that which you pass on to the next generation, our kids, my kids. Reconciliation action plans, I just want to give a plug, is a new tool. It's one of the things that we're doing at the moment that was started in 2006, and it's taken off like wildfire. Organisations like NAB have picked it up and have gone great guns. They're making a huge difference through their reconciliation action plans. There, brother, free plug for your mob there. And DY have also done an awesome job too, brother. I just want to acknowledge your RAP and the work of your RAP committee as well. So you can put that on your tweet if you know how to tweet there, brother. Can someone, young person, help that our government brother over there how to use it? But look, I just wanted to let you know that ever since this program started, just under 23,500 jobs have been pledged, and over 16,000 have been filled. $26 million have been spent by these wrapping organisations. This is over 300, which includes 1.6% of the population are now working or studying or for an organisation that have a reconciliation action plan. And 26, those organisations, some 300, which includes banks, government departments, local, state, federal government, some schools, some of them are double dipping and stronger, smarter, and they're doing school reconciliation action plans. And we've got a handsome young fellow over there called Alex who's helping us and coming to share and learn from stronger, smarter. Because of all of that collective activity, these people are purchasing goods and services from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander business to the order of $26 million. This is black business people already have goods and services being purchased by these organisations. 186,000 people have undertaken cultural awareness training. 161 Indigenous communities and organisations have been worked with in order to formulate the reconciliation action plans. And yeah, 2 million people are engaged in that process. This is not a perfect program, it's far from it. It's not a panacea for the change, but it's a step on the destiny. And your growth is a step on the destiny. And I want to encourage you, because you're not training stronger and smarter students in the future in a vacuum, there is a critical mass of organisations ready and waiting for the graduates that come from your institutions. I want to implore you, and I want to also thank Stronger Smarter for the kind of amazing work that they're doing, because you're actually preparing the next generation for a stronger, smarter Australia. Thank you.
Look, this room is full of positivity. That word was up on the screen earlier in the day. I know your optimism, your belief. You live and breathe the stronger, smarter philosophy. But let me confront you or challenge you with the bigger picture. We also have a reality where in the Northern Territory the Children's Commissioner has challenged us as a nation and reminded us of the youth suicide rate, which is a new, scary contagion where those young people feel it is so hopeless they can't live. We also have another kind of contagion. The media, Stephen, has let loose with a very destructive, damaging exploitation of some of these issues, like, for example, identity, which in Stronger Smarter is part of that positivity of lifting the expectation of every individual to be proud and strong and smart of who you are. But at this time that we're in, if we look at that big picture, the young Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person is facing a whole lot of confronting, confusing messages. So, Stephen, I don't really want to talk about your long writing in the National Indigenous Times. You write every week about this. But what do you say in your family to your own children? How do you make your young ones stay strong and smart when the messages coming at them are telling them that you may not really be black enough, you may not really be entitled to be on this educational pathway, or you still really aren't in this nation's planning, you're not one of our children. I think there are some very contradictory messages coming to young people today.
Look, thanks, Jeff. My wife and I, we're both Indigenous. I'm Culley and my wife Mamu. And I think the most important thing we stress to our children, we've got a son who's 19 and a daughter who's 17, is that there needs to be that really strong identity in the first instance, and knowing both sides of the family, the genealogy of both Mamu and Culley. And then once you're grounded in your culture, you can then focus on the education. Now, when my daughter Jade was in grade 10, she came to me and said, I want to go away to boarding school. And there was a perfectly good private schools in Toowoomba. And she actually picked out the private school she wanted to go to. It was the most expensive and exclusive in Brisbane. It was Clayfield College. So for $36,000 we had fined to send her to boarding school. And so she grew up in an environment where we didn't allow alcohol or drugs or anything in the house. She was protected from all the other bad elements of society, but she grew up with a very strong culture. Jade's about to finish year 12 now, and she wants to become a mining engineer, and she'll go to University of New South Wales next year. My son Stephen, he's got the same name, Paul Bogo, because with my everyone probably remembers me for the Nigger Brand campaign I ran in Toowoomba for 10 years. It took me to get the sign down. And my son, he went into law. He's third year law. And every time he's introduced to the class, they ask him what his name is. He just says Stephen. They said, what's your surname? Hagan. And of course, my case is often a legal study for the law students. But my advice to people who are starting out with young families or have got young kids now is you've got to provide them with that very safe background. They've got to be able to come home, feel protected, feel culturally safe, do away with the alcohol and the drugs if you can, and provide that environment. And then when they go through life, Jeff, the kids are well grounded. They'll never be shy or embarrassed about their Aboriginality. They can mix with the best end of the top end of town and still be very, very smart, but also be very, very proud.
Thank you. Jackie, the identity question is very serious, and it's also profound, because we will never raise expectations of any child if we are confused or we are confusing that child about who she is, who he is. how do you think we should get out of this damaging place we're in at the moment? A season where some of those children are being told they're not really Aboriginal. What do you do about that issue?
It's a very important and very, it's a festering question actually that this nation has to really, really come to terms with. My dear old mum used to say to me, you know, you raise your child, first thing you give it identity. You give it family, you give it love, support, but you've got to give the identity. You tell them they've got to be strong and smart like that and to be proud of who they are. Because by gee, when they get to school, a lot of that gets kicked out of them. So we raise our kids with that very strong essence of who they are and what they are. And like Stephen said, you know, we've had a history in this country where that has not been afforded to all of us. With our stolen generation peoples and the history around that, they never knew where they came from, who they belonged to, their identity, and we're still very much catching up on that, that history, but also for those people who have come back and are still coming back to our mob. I've always felt very privileged that this never happened to me, and I was just thinking about it actually yesterday in terms of you know, knowing who you are, where your place is and where you belong. So this idea of teaching stolen generations in schools and Marbo with the national curriculum, national history curriculum, I think is fantastic. I have lived to see the day where our history and our culture is going to be taught in schools. Now surely that's going to do something for our kids and for their identity. But I do take real exception, especially to the deplorable SBS program on Aboriginality. Tell you the truth, I don't know why those people participated in anyway. It was a big setup to talk about, you know, their feelings of their identity, and they just got kicked in the teeth. I'm sure that many of you had seen that. And this is real life, you know, this is realistic for a lot of our people who are still grappling with their issues of identity and where they come from. But for many of us, you know, I've had a blessed life in terms of knowing I was Aboriginal and where I came from. That's the kind of thing, if we can possibly instill not only to our children, but to the people that have come back. You know, we need to welcome those people, and we need to, you know, sit down and teach them some of the teachings that we were taught. But how the vicious media plays out, in fact, in terms of, you know, divide and conquer, you know, the real blackfellas versus the rest, the bush blackfellas versus the urban. We don't have that. You know, it is not us. It is the way that media portrays it, and politicians do that too, because they're out to conquer and divide us. And really what I see happening in this country, if we don't get it back together again really soon, I really, you know, have grave problems. I really see great problems for future generations. But we can bring it back, and as people, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, you know, we can bring this stuff back. I've seen it in the reconciliation process, and I've seen the work that the Strong and Smart Institute has done and will continue to do. But please, teachers, principals, you know, you've got to say to your kids that you're deadly, you know? Not that you're a deadly, but you're deadly and you're strong and smart.
Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people can do that. This government can't hand you empowerment. And what Edie was suggesting was that across the Aboriginal leadership, across the Torres Strait Islander leadership, and this is education can do this, not just building bridges, but articulate the stronger, smarter vision everywhere in all parts of our society, that unity of purpose will establish the common ground. It'll make the younger people understand that there is great depth of wisdom in the intellectual knowledge system, the human knowledge system, and that it's grounded here. Then we will be listening, and as a nation we'll have the power together to take the stronger, smarter vision and we will be a stronger, smarter nation. Thank you all.